Great. Welcome everyone to this live stream. My name is Jose Galarza. I'm one of the field leads with the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez re-election campaign. Thank you guys so much for coming out today. We really appreciate it. We know there's a lot going on in the world. And so the fact that you're here and wanting to make a difference, we really appreciate that. But I just wanted to welcome everyone today. We are talking about honor in the honor of immigration. New York City is a very diverse city with a variety of cultures from across the globe. And it's very exciting that we get to talk about this today because it's so important during these times that we try to recognize the people that we're trying to fight for. And a saying that I always like to tell myself is to fight for someone you don't know. And I think by you guys being here today, you are expressing that to fight for someone you don't know. So before I go any further, I actually wanted to share a short story. A little background on myself. I am Puerto Rican, and my parents migrated here to the United States in their early 20s. And of course, that has its own issues, but I was never aware of what it feels like to be undocumented. And that didn't happen until I had the opportunity to do an internship in Congress in DC. Of course, very fortunate. I would not have been able to if it were not for a nonprofit that would sponsor. But that's not really what's important. What's important were the other participants that were there. Some of the participants that were there were DACA recipients. And that was actually the year or the summer that when DAPA was in a case in the Supreme Court, and then they turned it down, which was very hard, especially for those who aren't documented, who especially were DACA recipients. So what happened was some of those interns came together and they did a silent protest in front of the Supreme Court building a day after this decision was made. And some of the signs that they put up were wordings like, "We stand together," "We are here to stay." And it was very impactful because not only were those who were DACA recipients there, but people of other cultures were there supporting as well in allyship. And from that point forward, I realized how important it was and to fight for others you don't know. And it made me realize that we need to really make some changes in the United States in terms of immigration. And I continue to every single day fight for that and making sure that everyone who is different or who may look different from us feels accepted and is able to sort of bring their full selves to this. Without further ado, so that was just what I wanted to share. I wanted to introduce a very special guest. His name is Matteo Guerrero. He is the TGNCIQ lead organizer. If you don't know what TGNCIQ means, it stands for transgender, gender nonconforming, or gender expansive, intersex, and queer. So TGNCIQ, lead organizer at Make the Road New York, where he runs the leadership school program space and is a movement curriculum for liberation. He supports organizing spaces for the TGNIQ community in Jackson Heights and Bushwick. Since migrating to the United States, Matteo has come out and embraced his identities as a transgender man of color and queer immigrant in order to organize and fight for immigrants, people who trade sex, and TGNCIQ communities of color. So without further ado, let me introduce Matteo.
Thank you, Jose. I appreciate the introduction, and thank you everyone who has tuned into this webinar. So my name is Matteo Guerrero. A little bit about me, I came from Colombia in 2010, and I was undocumented for several years, which is what prompted me to be in this fight for justice and liberation for about a decade already. I work at Make Through New York. We're a nonprofit organization that does community organizing and fights for policy in city, state, and federal level. We also provide survival services for our communities, different legal services, as well as food pantry, health access, and many other areas that our community needs to be able to survive. We are located in Brooklyn, in Queens, in Staten Island, Long Island, and Westchester. And so, one of our offices, the office in Queens, is located in Jackson Heights, which is it's right next to Corona, which is where the epicenter for COVID-19 happened. In New York City, there were around 204,000 plus cases of COVID-19. And out of those, 60,000 of those were in my borough in Queens, and 66,000 deaths happened here. So because we know that our community were highly impacted, we decided to do a survey to try to understand a little bit more what was happening and show the level of urgency that there is to bring on a structural change for our communities. So some of the survey findings that we had is that 9 out of 10 folks that were surveyed, particularly Black and Brown immigrant New Yorkers, reported that they had lost income in their household, which is 9 out of 10. And then 5% of them, only 5% were able to access unemployment insurance in the past month. 54% of those are essential workers here in New York City who are still out there providing support for the rest of us. And 0% were invested, were given to excluded workers from government assistance. So in terms of the immigration aspect, there's a couple of things that I wanted to talk about today. In terms of the federal level, there is currently a bill, the HEROES Act, that passed in the House of Representatives, which is the Health and Economic Recovery of News Emergency Solutions. And there are important provisions that were included, right? So there was the extension of direct payments to all taxpayers. So people that are receiving ITIN numbers will be able to continue to receive support or access support. It will also cover COVID-19 testing, treatment, and vaccination through emergency Medicaid. It will extend work permits for DACA and TPS holders. This is particularly important in a moment where there is so much uncertainty about what's going to happen in the Supreme Court with DACA, with the case of DACA. There is an infusion of resources to state and local governments. There are going to be grants given to essential workers, and Puerto Rico is also included into the HEROES Act and the funding. But when we think about recovery and providing substantial resources to our community, there's a lot more that needs to happen. In terms of financial relief and workers' justice, we need to make sure that immigrant communities, regardless of their immigration status, are able to access unemployment insurance, that we're able to pass the Paycheck Guarantee Act, that there are recurring payments of $2,000 per person, that we're able to pass an Essential Workers Bill of Rights. It also means that we need to go beyond of the support that is happening in terms of health access. So we need to make sure that we pass the Healthcare Emergency and Guarantee Act, that there is cancellation of rent, and that there is that we're able to bring our communities out of the cages, so liberate our people who are incarcerated and detained who are at risk, and suspend the implementation of the public charge rule. So folks through emergency programs are able to access health support, but our communities that are undocumented are so afraid of the implementation of public charge that they're not even accessing the services that they have, that they so deserve right now because of the fear of retaliation from the government. And then in the state government, what we're fighting for is that, one, we are fighting for to create a budget of 3.5 billion for excluded workers to be able to receive unemployment support, and also for families that have lost the breadwinner in their families, or who have no access to replacement income. We're fighting for the cancellation of rent. One of the things that happened this past week is that the state government, they made an announcement that they were going to give around $100 million of support in vouchers to people who are unable to pay for rent. But the reality that we know is that that bill does nothing, right? Like, if people will still have to pay the same percentage that they were paying before in terms of rent. For example, I'm sorry, I'm being confusing, but if before the pandemic they were paying 60% of their income in rent, it means that right now they will still have to pay 60% of their income, and then the remaining will be the voucher that the government will give them, the state government. And we know that actually makes no difference in our people's pockets. We're also, in terms of cancellation of rent, we're also demanding that there's a suspension in the mortgage payments. And one campaign that is particularly close to my heart because of the communities that I work with, particularly trans and queer communities, is the Freedom All campaign. So we are demanding that folks that are in jails, prisons, whether state or federal, and in detention facilities are released right now from these cages. Folks who are over the age of 50, folks who are trans and queer, folks who are immunocompromised, folks who are pregnant, and folks also who have a year or less remaining of their time. We are demanding this because we know that prisons, jails, and detention facilities are spaces that are prone for high levels of infection. We know that Rikers Island has one of the highest in New York City. 107. It's about 170 cases per thousand. And given everything that is happening, the fear is that there is going to be an increase of the population in Rikers and any other jails and prisons. And these are places that are not safe for our people. Also, the Batavia Detention Center has one of the highest number of positive cases in any federal prison. So we're truly demanding that the state of New York, that Cuomo, both the Assembly and the Senate, take action as we continue to have a fight in the federal level. I think particularly on the topic of immigration, there is in order to free the campaign of Freedom All, right? If we take a step back, it's also in talking about what it means to decriminalize our communities. We live in a hyper-surveilled and hyper-policed communities, and we need to be able to end the different practices that NYPD has been using to criminalize our folks. So we are demanding that we repeal 50A to bring police transparency of misconduct, that we are able to know the records of all the violence that is happening and have the full information. We are demanding to have a state prosecutor, a special prosecutor that can look into the cases of NYPD murders towards our communities. We are demanding that there is the repeal of the walking while trans, which is Penal Code 24037. And that particular code criminalizes transgender women of color, Black and brown, for walking down the street and existing in public. And we're also demanding that there is a decriminalization of the sex trades. We're fighting for the Stop Violence in the Sex Trades Act. And so if we're able to pass this legislation now that the state government has resumed the legislative session, we're able to put a stop on incarceration of our people and then continue to fight to bring everyone out of the cages. So these are some of the campaigns that we're working on in the federal and the state level. And if you want to receive more updates on how to take action, you can text ROAD, ROAD, to 52886 to receive more updates. Also, and I just want to make a quick parenthesis, beside policy, for folks who need support that are on the streets, Black and brown undocumented immigrants who are supporting our comrades, you can reach out to Make the Run. We'll provide support. Now I want to introduce, it's an honor to introduce Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, someone who I truly admire and who has been a hero in our communities. So thank you, Alexandria, for the space, and thank you, everyone.
No, of course. Thank you so much, Matteo. Thank you for offering your insight and your advocacy and your brilliance and sharing that with us, with our community and all of our volunteers tonight. You did such an incredible and amazing job. Thank you for all of your work. Thank you for everything you do in giving so much to our community here in Queens and really our entire immigrant community in New York City and across the country. So thank you so much, Matteo. And I think it's, I want to pick up on one of your last notes, which was so important. Given everything that's happening this week, I think that it's important to reiterate how all of these issues intersect and connect with the movement for Black lives. And the immigration movement and the movement for immigration justice is no exception from that. While people tend to think of the immigration movement overall as just being quote unquote Latino, first of all, it's important for us to name and recognize our incredible Afro-Latino community as being part of it, and also our Black immigrant community. We also do a lot of work with BAJI, which focuses, an organization that focuses specifically on the rights of Black immigrants here in our community. That's to say that immigration rights also intersect with the movement for Black lives, and the abuse and a lot of the danger that our overall immigrant community is subject to is subject doubly so for our Black immigrant brothers and sisters. And so it's important to say that explicitly. It's important to name it explicitly. And it's so incredible to see how these areas truly begin to intersect in an overall questioning of the structure of our police state. And that extends to something, a very basic fact that a lot of people don't know, which is that the largest law enforcement agency in the United States is CBP, Customs and Border Patrol. Those are the folks that have been putting children and families in cages at our border and throughout the country. This is the same law enforcement agency that took away women from their children and children from their families. And frankly, kidnapped them because they deported many of their parents and many of their loved ones. And in a horrific violation of international human rights, it is going to be very difficult for us to reunite these families in their future. We have been slowly creeping towards this moment, and it is a moment of reckoning for justice. And it is a moment where we need to move through and create justice for all families in the United States. Because at the end of the day, so much of this is about our commitment to human rights. And those human rights should apply no matter your citizenship or no matter your nationality. Having our immigration movement join the fight for repealing 50A really just goes to show that these issues impact all of us. We should make sure that ICE and CBP are not freewheeling and working with local police departments. There's no rationale or reasoning for that. And so dismantling this, defunding ICE and CBP, along with defunding overfunded departments, police departments, is all part and all linked in very linked and similar fights. And so thank you, Matteo, your notes as well on making sure that we are repealing laws that ban or punish walking while trans here in our community is extremely important, because this is not just about Black Lives Matter, but this is also about how Black trans lives matter, because we know that they are also systematically under-advocated for across the country. And so thank you so much for highlighting all of the different ways and all of the different commitments that we have in fighting for justice. As many of you all know, we believe that in the abolishment of ICE, we believe in the defunding of a broad range of departments that have been over-militarized and over-targeting of our our immigrant communities. And at the end of the day, this is also about a broader shift in our immigration policy towards one that is not not hinged upon and entirely predicated upon militarization, but one that focuses on safe passage for immigrants that are seeking refuge in the United States of America. And so I thank you so much. Thank you, Matteo, for your relentless advocacy, your intersectional advocacy, and how inclusive you are in your approach, but beyond inclusive, how much of an ally you are, and making sure that we are also actively including and naming so many communities in our immigration policy. And that being said, the only way that we're going to get these policies is if we make sure that we turn out the vote. And we have to ensure that we have elected officials in place that are bold enough, that are strong enough, that advance these rights and these policies as much as humanly possible. And so it's so important, especially here in the state of New York, through all of this, through the uprising that is happening right now, that we do not forget the very critical elections that we are having on June 23rd. We need to turn out so many people to the polls in the same numbers that we are protesting, and the same numbers that we are turning out, and the same numbers that we are demanding for justice. We need to do it everywhere. We need to be everywhere. We need to be in the streets. We need to be on TV. We need to be in the ballot box. We need to be on social media. We need to be everywhere. And that means we need to flood the polls on June 23rd, or if you prefer, a few days before that during early voting, or if you prefer, even before that with your absentee ballot. Either way, we need to flood the polls on the 23rd here in the state of New York. That's how we're going to get systematic change. And that's where each and every one of you come in. I've been hearing from a lot of folks saying, I can't go out into the streets. I'm a caregiver. I take care of young children, or I take care of elderly parents. I can't have the COVID risk and passing it on to them, or for any other reason that you are home. You are still a part of this movement. It is not exclusive and it is not exclusionary. And you deciding to pick up a phone tonight and deciding to put in some phone banking calls and deciding to do 5 more calls when you're tired, that is such a huge, enormous contribution to the larger movement for social change as well. I thank each and every one of you all, because as we know, it's no mistake. We went out our first term. I went hard. And when you speak truth to power, power fights back. So I was fully expecting rigorous opposition from corporate interests. And that is where the courage comes in. And the only reason that I am able to have the voice that I have with the rigor that it has is because of the people, each and every one of you that are on this call right now, that are willing to pick up a phone and have the back of the movement, not just have my back, but this is really just about having the back of anyone that takes the courage of very strong advocacy and taking risky positions that frankly should just be common sense. And so the only reason I'm able to do this is because people like you are on this call tonight and have our back in organizing for the ballot box. And so I just want to thank you. I want to thank each and every one of you so very much. Thank you to everyone who's attending this live stream.